Look, from these upside-down candles in the night sky bowl, magnificent beings arose so that the mystery could unfold. This whirling of planets and the stars brought you a sound sleep. But for a life so light, be careful of a sleep so heavy. My inner self, seek the self of love. My inner friend, seek the friend. My inner self, seek the self of love. My inner friend, seek the friend. Inner witness, stay alert. It's not your job to fall asleep. Inner witness, stay alert. It's not your job to stay asleep. The streets are full of torches. Chaos and din are everywhere. Tonight, this grasping, getting world gives birth to an eternal one. Tonight, this grasping, getting world gives birth to an eternal one. It's simple. You thought you were dust, but now you find you are breath. You thought you were dust, but tonight you find you are breath. Before you were ignorant, but now you know more. Surely, the one who has led us this far will guide us further on as well. Welcome with that marvellous poem and the music of my three marvellous players, Jamila and Mike and Ali. We have started with a poem from one of the great Sufi poets and teachers of wisdom, Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi of Konya. An appropriate place, I believe, for us to start this evening's talk, because Mevlana Rumi knew about living in troubled and difficult times. He was the product of a migrant family on the run from conflict, oppression and war. His family came from Balkh, which is now in Afghanistan, and he was on the run from the Mongol invaders with his family. And he grew up in what is now eastern Turkey in the city of Konya after many, many stops on the way. He lived under the oppression of many military powers, and his life was deeply affected by the loss of his great friend and his great teacher, Shams Tabriz, who may well, according to some of the myths, have been murdered by the followers, the more orthodox followers of the Imam Rumi. In the midst of all this, he produces some of the greatest spiritual poetry of all times. Poetry which embraces compassion, acceptance, and embraces difference. It is said that at his funeral there were Hindus, there were Christians, there were Muslims, there were Jews. It was a gathering of people of all faiths and none. And still every year, and some people who are here tonight have been to the annual Urs in Konya, where Sufis and spiritual seekers from all over the world gather on what's described as his night of nuptials. It's called the night of nuptials because this is the day when a great Sufi teacher dies. It's their wedding night, when finally they are married to the oneness of all being. Mevlana comes in the middle of a great period of 500 years, longer, probably 800 years of great Sufi poetry from the Middle East. It probably begins with the great female poet, Rabia of Basra. She too knew conflict. She left her home and family in the Basra region and all her brothers and sisters to go to the desert at a time when Basra, like today, that poor, beleaguered city in the midst of war, like today, it was the middle of a very difficult time. It was a time of famine. And she said, no, I will leave. There's not enough food. I will go to the desert and I will seek spiritual sustenance. So we'll hear from her later. These poets experienced personal and political suffering. Some were in prison, some were tortured. Many were migrants and some were refugees. They, like us, were in a world of turmoil and instability. And tonight we will drink deep from this rich well of Sufi wisdom, focusing on the great poets from this golden age. The period can be seen as going from about 8th century, with Rabia coming from Basra, to Jami in the 15th century. And tonight we'll bow and pay homage to such poets as Hakim Sanai of Ghazni in Afghanistan, Sheikh Ibn Arabi, who started his life in Andalusia, went to Mecca, crossed North Africa, and then finally is dead and is buried in another troubled city of Damascus. We'll bow to Faridin Attar of Nishapur, and Sadi and Hafiz of Shiraz, and of course Mevlana Rumi of Konya in our current day Turkey. And we'll offer, as we do so, a little prayer for the people who lived in these current troubled lands. They were great poets, teachers, philosophers and travellers, but at their heart they were explorers. They were explorers of where the personal heart meets the heart of all being, and were all of them lovers of the oneness of life. They were at the heart and at the feeling, emotional end of the great Islamic Renaissance, which preceded and was the foundation of the Italian and Western European Renaissance. Some of you will know that Chaucer's Parliament of Birds is very directly based on Faridin Attar's Conference of Birds. Our great so-called Gothic cathedrals were built on Islamic architectural principles. And Italian Neoplatonism is built on the great Neoplatonic philosophy of Sufi thinkers such as Avicenna, Averroes, and Ibn al-Arabi. So let me just pause and say to you all, thank you for coming tonight. And thank you to Armin, John Witt, who's sitting in the middle, for organising tonight. It's a special occasion to bring together friends, people who have been friends and colleagues for many years, and to share some of our love and some of our passion for Sufism. And if it wasn't Sufi poetry, the other talk you were expecting, you too can leave now, because otherwise you may find your mind is turned in a great metanoia from the music and poetry of this evening. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to revisit this great well, this great wellspring and source of wisdom, to remember their teachings and return to this source, to resource myself and you at this great time. This time of what Joanna Macy calls the great turning in the world. I will start with just saying a little bit about the challenges that face us and offer some thoughts around that, and then I'll offer you some of 9 different ways that I think the Sufi poets bring wisdom that we can use in a very practical and daily basis when we're in the midst of this great turn. We will do 4 of their teachings before the break. We'll have a short break and we'll do 5 afterwards. And we'll start again with some music and another rich, amazing poem. So what we're going to explore to begin with is, what is it in the world that we are worried about? So we did warn you this is an experiential lecture, so I'm going to ask you to turn to the person next to you. And if you're sitting next to someone you know, turn the other way. That'll become a 3. And just ask them, just look them in the eye and ask them with an open, interested curiosity, what in the world are you worried about? And discover their first answer. Before you're finished. This is intentional because I have discovered if you let people finish, they get attached to their own worry. And tonight we are here to learn and explore through dialogue, not through personal attachment to our own pre-rehearsed and pre-thought worries. So let me just hear a few phrases shouted out, or words. What are you most worried about? Anybody, just shout out a phrase or a word.
Fear.
Fear. I'm frightened of fear. Worried about fear.
Insecurity.
Insecurity.
Being more successful.
Worried about being more successful than whom?
Than I am already.
So you're worried that you might be more successful than you are already.
Descendants.
What was the other one?
Descendants.
Descendants.
Yeah. Grandchildren, children.
About the people who come after us, the legacy we leave.
Balance.
Balance. Between inner balance, outer balance, the soil and the earth. Any others which are different?
End of liberalism and tolerance.
The end of liberalism and tolerance. Sam?
I'm worried about the youth and their ability to deal with screens, and whether they can manage it.
Screens, as in
Screens,
smartphones.
Yeah, smartphones.
Computers. So we have a whole scattering of top level. And I'm going to share with you some of the things that I'm concerned about on a global scale. Before the Brexit vote, I wrote a blog, not being directly partisan on either side, but saying how the major challenges of the world could not be addressed by retreating into nation states. For each, I believe, of these great challenges, some of which have been mentioned, require a joined-up global response. A response that's beyond the reason of our left hemisphere neocortex. A response that has to bring together the whole brain, the body, and be mediated through the heart. That needs to be global and collective. For none of us have the answers. The 5 major challenges I talked about. The first, and I think the one we always have to put first, that of climate change and what the human species have done to the biosphere. For this challenge faces not only our human species, but the whole of the ecology that supports us, surrounds us, and all the beings that we share this moment in time with. It's now accepted by way over 99% of scientists that climate change is a direct result of human pollution, and that the threat is getting worse by the day. We have, many tell us, a limited window before the effects will trigger large runaway cycles of consequences, which will be irreversible. Only radical international action can prevent the worst of global warming and increased climate disasters, and the increase in what is an unprecedented destruction of many species. But the second, and not separate, is economic and social inequality. For it is clear that we cannot solve the issues of climate change without also addressing the growing inequality between the world's richest and the world's poorest. And that's not just inequality financially, but inequality in terms of opportunity, in terms of freedom, in terms of education. In the last 50 years, many humans have been lifted out of poverty. And some would argue we have the lowest levels of poverty and of ill health in terms of percentage than have ever existed in the world. So we must also remember the positive side. We do live in a world of abundance, of greater longevity, less people dying from murder and war, less people dying of poverty in terms of a percentage than ever in human history. But at the same time, the gap between the world's richest 5% and the world's poorest 50% gets bigger and bigger. We now live in a hyper-connected world where the poorest and the most destitute are knowing what the richest are getting and keeping. And they too want what the best and the richest have. And this will continue to fuel international migration, war and conflict. So we start to see that these 5 areas are all interlinked. The third is terrorism, war and security. We're now in a position where small groups of human beings who feel unrecognised, badly treated or humiliated and shamed can now quickly develop the power of weapons and cyber attacks to terrorise those with whom they are angry and those who they see as denying them. Only international cooperation on security can contain the impact of global threat, global insecurity, which was mentioned. And then all of these, all those 3 above, will continue to drive, I would suggest, international migration. But unless we deal with these root causes of migration, we will witness both ever-increasing numbers of refugees and growing inhumane border control. And Julie and I had an instance of this only last week with a 19-year-old American girl who was coming from California as a volunteer woofer. You know what woofers are. Worldwide opportunities on organic farms. And this 19-year-old student with a return ticket to America was interrogated for 5 hours at our own borders and then put on a plane back to Paris on the grounds that by volunteering she was taking away work from British people. And that's just one, just small example. It's a very light level, but this is part of a worldwide pressure. You mentioned the loss of liberalism, but out of fear, what we do to young innocents. And fifthly, a global economic system that needs regulation. There has been increasing exposure of how global companies, super rich individuals, can avoid paying their fair contribution in taxation by moving their assets internationally. Now that we have a globalized economy, we now need international regulation to ensure that banks, businesses, and the powerfully rich are properly regulated and contributing to the benefit of the whole human family and also to the more than human world. We do not need less bureaucracy, as some would argue, just more intelligent and wise bureaucracy that is internationally created and internationally adhered to. But these are not separate issues. They can't be dealt with by separate ministries or departments or nation states. We can think of them as aspects of health of our one human species and our one global biosphere. At the top level, and we started to touch on that, we have the symptoms. We can get angry about Brexit or Trump or Putin or Syria or warfare or poverty or famine or Islamic fundamentalist terrorism or climate change, extinction of so many living species. There is so much for us to get angry about. I think it's a daily spiritual practice to be able to watch the news without having what some psychologists would call an amygdala hijack. When suddenly our survival bit comes in and we're into fight or flight, either turning for a drink or shouting at the screen. Indeed, the screen can be very dangerous. But these current symptoms are driven by a deeper, longer-lasting systemic patterns. One is that we have a demographic explosion. The world's population the year I was born was 2.4 billion. Today it is 7.35 billion. That means I, and those of you who share the privilege of my age, have seen the world's population treble in our own lifetime. Multiply it by 3. I tell you, if you ever go to Moscow or Beijing or Tokyo or Sao Paulo, you start to experience directly what that feels like. This is unprecedented. It has never happened in human history. It took till 1830 for us to get to 1 billion and another 100 years to double, and now we've trebled in my own lifetime. Climate change, as Naomi Klein said, this changes everything. It provides us on something on a global scale where even if we stop carbon production today, we will be living with it for the next 200 years. Technological revolution, for all of those who believe that you can stop globalization, I think they would have to explain to me how we will stop technological innovation, because it's technology that will continue to drive us being a hyper-connected, hyper-change world. And these systemic patterns underneath them have some important global drivers. The first I've already mentioned is that with this fourth industrial revolution that some people talk about that we're now in, that this is a revolution that is not just a digital and technology revolution, it's a biotechnology, it's a robotic, it's where lots of sciences are coming together and creating change in an integrated way. This has happened and has brought about globalization, but it has been done in a way that has increased global inequality. At the same time, we have failed to educate ourselves, our friends, our children on how to live in a globalized world. We can see what is now happening not as something we should blame people who are on the right or people who are ignorant. We should actually say this is something we're all responsible for not having educated ourselves, our friends, our family, our children. And how do we live in this very changed world that we have all created? And finally, as I've indicated, the other one is a failure in knowing how to do global governance. We've got to remember nation states, most of them only appeared in the last 200 years. There was no India, there was no Germany, there was no Italy 200 years ago. There are modern inventions, and yet now we have to recognise, as I've indicated, that we have to move on again, because nation states cannot deal with the world we have now created. Without new education from cradle to hospice, and new forms of global dialogue and governance, we will not reduce global inequality, and if we fail to reduce global inequality, we do not have a snowball in hell's chance. This is a phrase from Gregory Bateson. We do not have a snowball in hell's chance of ameliorating climate change. So what I would suggest, and this is where the great Sufi poets come back in. That these failures for us as a species could be seen as an evolutionary crisis, a wake-up call. That we as human beings have failed to co-evolve our consciousness in relationship with the social, technological, demographic and ecological changes we have been responsible for co-creating in this world. There are thousands of challenges, thousands of things to be worried about, but at heart there is only one. The need for human beings as a species to evolve our collective human consciousness. To evolve it fast enough for Homo sapiens to finally, truly be sapiens, which for those of you who don't realise means wisdom, the knowing hominoid. To be fit, for Homo sapiens to be fit to continue to be part of the biosphere in the late 21st century, when our grandchildren and great-grandchildren inherit the legacy we leave. In response to the great challenges facing our globe, most human beings respond most of us respond either through denial or through forlorn, hubristic attempts to develop science and technology fast enough for the human species to stay one step ahead of the challenges. Either we go into denial or we go into heroism. It's another form of fight or flight. Either deny what we're facing, it's too much, we say, or we go into, don't worry, if we only innovate faster, we can save the world. And I don't think we've asked the world whether it wants saving by us. The need for us as human species is to evolve our consciousness to be able to respond fully to the complexity of the world that we have been responsible for co-evolving. So let's link this back to Sufism. For Pir Elias, who is the current head of the Sufi way, who I spoke to earlier this afternoon, he puts this much more beautifully than I can. When he writes, well, Mike will read his voice this evening on a number of occasions. If you could stand and just read it.
We live in an extraordinary and dangerous time. We keep multiplying and demanding more sustenance and material comfort from our generous and fragile planet. We even now talk of migrating to other planets, since it's obvious we are hell-bent on trashing this one. But even if we could fly off to other planets, verdant enough to support us, we wouldn't deserve them. Without knowing who we are and how it is we belong here, we will never grace any planet with our presence. We do belong here. We belong together. We belong with the great community of life on Earth. We belong in the cosmos and in the heart of all being. Our belonging is immanent and self-evident in this moment. Experiencing this immediacy of this revelation is the deepest desire of these writings.
And I would echo this by saying, experiencing this immediacy, the wisdom that comes through experience, through intimate experience, experiencing this intimacy of this revelation is also the deepest desire of this talk this evening. The Sufi tradition, throughout all its years, which go back, many would say, pre the great poets, pre the Prophet Muhammad, pre-Islam, through the Gnostic Desert Fathers, through Jesus, through the Essenes, through the Chaldeans, right back through the Pythagoreans, the early mystery schools. It's a tradition of Gnostic knowing, the knowing of the heart, the knowing of experience, not the knowing of words in Scripture. The Sufi tradition, this great perennial tradition, offers a rare and deeply developed alternative path. Rather than a path of egoic and heroic left-brain learning that attempts to conquer, command and control the world, it offers a path of humility and wisdom, which is in service of co-creative evolution with the world beyond us. A path of non-duality and of seamless connection, beyond self and other. This belief beyond not only self and other, but beyond this belief versus that belief. Beyond the separation of the human and the more than human world. Pierre Elias poses us this question.
Are non-dual teachings just some transcendent philosophy with no relevance or guidance for our struggling world? My experience is that they are relevant, precisely relevant, though easily misunderstood. Their intention is to blow away our usual way of thinking about things, especially the idea that we are independent agents of change.
So, their intention is to blow away our usual way of thinking about things, especially this idea that we are independent agents of change. A belief I certainly find I fall into every day. So let us together attempt to blow away some of our ingrained ways of thinking about things. Mevlana Jalaluddin really asks us, why? Why, in the plenitude of God's great universe, have each one of you chosen to fall asleep in such a small, dark prison? Why? This small, dark prison is the prison of our own thinking. So let's see tonight if we can discover some of the keys that will liberate us. I'm going to offer 9. 4 before the break, 5 afterwards, and we'll have a chance for tea and talk in between, just so that we can get back to our usual self before we do a bit more blowing away of our thinking. Each will be illustrated by some Sufi poetry. Some will be illustrated by a bit of experience, and we'll have some more music later on. The 9 I'm going to offer you are that the first is how can we turn our information overload, and I think a couple of you refer to that in your worries, into knowledge, and how can we turn knowledge into wisdom. That's number 1. Secondly, how do we develop our being, our adab, as the Sufis would call it, and our craft, and discover what we each can uniquely do that the world of tomorrow needs. 3, how can we be in generous service of the world around us, both human and more than human world? And 4, how to welcome the other, whoever they are, as a mirror of a hidden part of ourselves, remembering we are all part of one human family. After the break, we'll talk about how to dissolve the separation between the human and the more than human world, how to notice the dualities that take shape in our mind almost in every sentence we utter, in every thought we think, and how do we dissolve them both in our own mind and in others. Then how do we walk the path of love, the Sufi path often called the path of love, and walk that path of love at the same time as we embrace perpetual transformation. It's easy to love that which stands still, but in this universe nothing stands still. 8, how do we welcome all, yes, all that comes our way? And 9, how, to echo the words that marvelous poem we started with, how do we stay awake and learn on the journey? So let's start with the first. The importance of wisdom, not knowledge, and knowledge, not information. How do we have living scripture, not dogma? Hakim Salai's great poem, which we're going to hear a bit about from just after the break with music, called the walled garden of truth, wrote in it, knowledge without wisdom is like an unlit candle. Which reminds me to light the candle. And what you'll notice, if we light the candle of knowledge, where knowledge is the wax, and the flame, the light, is the light of wisdom. The light of wisdom burns up the knowledge. Knowledge is not something to cling to, it's something to burn, to turn into light. And several of us here, one of our earliest teachers was Pir Murshid Fazl Inayat Khan. And he always used to say, make sure when you die, you've burnt up all your wax. Lovely phrase. So Hakim Sanai says, knowledge without wisdom is like an unlit candle. A sentiment echoed more recently by T.S. Eliot, 20th century great poet, who wrote in The Rock, where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? And he was writing between the two world wars and just after the Second World War, but never is that more true. Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? And where is the knowledge we have lost in information? We had a gathering at Barrow Castle last year of 15 fantastic millennial entrepreneurs with enormous energy. And one of the projects they set themselves was, how can we devise a way of sharing wisdom on the internet rather than information? Amazing. And they by the second day of this weekend, they had already bought a website, they had it up and running, they had video content, and they discovered all sorts of principles of how to share wisdom, when most of what we share is information, much of which isn't true. Probably all of it. Never has this been more true than today. Eric Schmidt, the Google executive chairman, and many of us will no doubt go onto Google regularly, he said in 2010, right, so 7 years ago, from the very beginning of time until the year 2003, humankind created 5 exabytes of digital information. Who was counting? I don't know, but that's what he claims. An exabyte is 1 billion gigabytes, right? So we've done 5 by 2003. So an exabyte is 1 with 18 zeros after it. You can picture that. If you're good at numbers. Right now, in the year 2010, he says the human race is generating the same amount, 5 exabytes of information, every two days. Right? We were creating the same amount in 2 days that it took us the whole history up to 2003. Today, we're doing it in about 5 minutes. Right? And he ends by saying, it's no wonder we're all exhausted. Our brains cannot digest what we put into them. And we have lost the ability to discern truth from fake news. So where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? And where is the knowledge we have lost in information? Mevlana Rumi says, lovely line. I was invited about 12 years ago to go to Turkey to talk about what the Western Europe could learn from Turkey about leadership, which I thought was a lovely paradoxical invitation, which I couldn't resist taking up. And I searched the Hall of the Mathnawi, which some of you will know in several volumes, to find what did Rumi say about leadership, and I just found one line, a line I've never forgotten because it was so precious. He says, leadership is a poison unless we have the antidote in our hearts. And he goes on to show us that Sufism is the antidote to dogmatic scripture. The poets warn us how great teachings can turn into dangerous dogmatism. Nietzsche's writings became dogma of Nazism. The teachings of Jesus, so moving and so of the heart, on compassion, became the dogma of the Crusaders and of the Ku Klux Klan. The teaching of the Prophet Muhammad on surrender and inclusion. The word Islam means to surrender. Became the rallying cry of the fundamentalist Islamic radicalism. So let's hear from another voice. This time we're going to go further east. Kabir, an Indian Sufi poet.
There is nothing but water in your holy pools. I know, I've been swimming in them. All the gods sculpted of wood or ivory can't say a word. I know, I've been crying out for them. The sacred books of the East are nothing but words. I looked through their covers one day, sideways. What Kabir talks of is only what he's lived through. If you have not lived through something, it's not true.
And let me promise, whatever I say tonight, I promise it's not true. It's one of the great lines, if any of you ever had the opportunity before he died to hear Krishna immersion. He used to come every year to Hampshire, to Brockwood, and he always used to keep saying in his talk, but remember what I'm saying to you, it is not true. Only if you live it and you experience it, then it is true. And perhaps even then, only momentarily. As Sufi celebrants, there's one or two people here tonight who've worked with Elias and myself training as Sufi celebrants, we practice disassembling every altar after every ritual, not leaving it as a permanent structure. We hold all beliefs lightly, or try to, without attachment. And we realize that the path of wisdom involves more unlearning than it does learning. My God, unlearning is much more hard than learning. Particularly when you've got lots of wax you collected over many years of study. My friend and colleague from the Sufi way, Kiran Rana in San Francisco, wrote, Sufism is about decoding the mystery of life. It's not decoding it in theory, but through experience. Sufism describes at the same time a search for and an opening to love, a way into the heart that equally values our relationship to the one and to others, and asks us to find our wholeness and our humanness. Sufism does not originate from a rest on scripture, dogma, or doctrine, while its core metaphors are eternal. Its expression in the world changes to meet the needs of every time. Sufism calls on us, this is my words, to use our whole brain, not just our left hemisphere neocortex. For our knowing, it says, needs to be embodied. It needs to be experimental and experiential, and to be ecological. We need to live our lessons, not swallow them whole, and to learn within and without at the same time. Today, often the world of self-exploration and self-awareness, world of mindfulness, of retreats, is separated from the world of embracing what life brings. Perhaps what we need is not spiritual retreats, but spiritual advances, where we find spirituality in the midst of the challenge of life, not in the separation from it. To address the world's challenges, we need to hold all our thoughts lightly. And Pir Elias gives us a gentle but profound experiment, which I'm going to invite you to engage in. I'll give the experiment. I want you to imagine something in your mind right now, anything, any thought. Just notice what thought comes as you pause. Perhaps close your eyes and just see what thoughts lurking in the recesses of your mind. And see if you can find, where did that thought come from? Did you create it? And if you did, how? How did you create it? Where did it start? Where was it manufactured in you? And why did this particular thought appear right now and not a different one? Did you select it? But look carefully, he says. See if you could discover the exact place or moment in which you made that thought. And if the thought's gone, did you notice when it went? Did you choose? And where did the thought go to? What is the practice? It's a very useful practice that you can do, which is not to get attached to the thought, but notice the thought the moment it arrives. Welcome it, listen to it, and watch it go. Thoughts arise, thoughts leave. Do we make them, or do they visit us? Or neither? The second teaching we're going to bring from the great Sufi poets is how to perfect your adab and your craft, your gift or profession. Becoming a person and becoming fully human is a lifelong journey of learning and unlearning for each of us. It involves developing what the Sufis call our adab. This is an Arabic word. It means behavioural etiquette. So there is the adab of the host and the adab of the guest, the adab of the teacher, and the adab of the student, the adab of the parent, the grandparent, the adab of the neighbour. Kabir Hemensky, a current Mevlevi sheikh, writes in one of his beautiful books, adab is the ability to sense what is appropriate in each and every moment, and to give to each its due. It's a continuous process of refining one's speech and one's actions. For to have adab is to be cultured, in the true sense of the word. In developing our adab, we offer an elegance and a gracefulness towards self and towards others. We are continuously creating and recreating conscious relationship within us and without. Somebody talks about balance. We can talk about the art of adab, which is how do we create conscious relationship within and conscious relationship without, and how are those related? The Sufi is in the world but not captured by it. The Sufi finds their spirituality in the marketplace, not in the monastery. They're the carpet weaver, the artist, the stonemason, a farmer or a fabric seller. Their Sufism is kept in the back room of their shop or workshop, not put for display in the shop window. So they teach us how not only to develop our adab, but also our craft, our particular gift or contribution to the wider community and to the ecology. For each of us has something uniquely to contribute to the great mosaic of life. No one occupies the space in the web that you do. Our task, your task, is to discover our particular gift, to live it fully and to offer it. Let's hear from Sadi.
O darlings of your fathers, learn the trade, because property and riches of the world are not to be relied upon. Also, silver and gold are an occasion of danger, because either a thief may steal them at once, or the owner spend them gradually. But a profession or craft is a living fountain and permanent wealth. And although a craftsman may lose riches, it does not matter, because a profession or craft is itself wealth. And wherever you go, you will enjoy respect and sit on high places, whereas those who have no trade will glean crumbs and see hardships.
I was going to pause at this point and ask you to turn to your partner again, but I don't want to delay the tea break too long. This is a question. If you meet somebody over tea, you could ask them, who and what does your work and your life serve right now? And this notion of developing one's own craft, one's own adab, is linked to the next one, which is generosity and service. Muhammad Chishti, who brought Sufism from Persia to India and was one of the great early teachers in the line of Chishti Sufis, interpreted religion in terms of human service, and he exhorted his disciples to develop river-like generosity, sun-like affection, and earth-like hospitality. Isn't that beautiful? I'll read it again. I'll make this available so you don't have to try and capture the words as I go along. To develop river-like generosity, flowing stream of refreshing water, sun-like affection that warms all that are around you, and earth-like hospitality that accepts willingly whatever arrives and put into it. The highest form of devotion, according to him, was to redress the misery of those in distress, to fulfill the needs of the helpless, and to feed the hungry. Meditation, mindfulness, and spiritual practice can so easily become another form of spiritual materialism, feeding our nafs, as the Sufis would call it, or our ego of the self. Unless we realize that our mind is not something we own, it's within us. Our mind is not something we own that is within us, but part of a web of mind in which we partake. Our mindfulness needs to flow into compassion, the opening to another's needs, seeing the world from their eyes and walking a mile in their shoes, or in the lack of them. So let's hear from Pir Elias again.
The cry of the world is still there. It's everywhere. And you are seamless with it. There is an old person living alone just a few houses from yours, who hasn't smiled in weeks. There is your own son or daughter, or father or mother, with whom you haven't been fully present. There are refugees in your city from Syria who need to learn your language and be welcomed. There are people on the other side of the world who have no idea of the freedom you enjoy and the creativity they are capable of. Of course, you can't respond to all of it. You can only respond to what is yours to do, what comes to you to do.
It's so beautifully put. It comes from his book, Fresh Rain. There's some copies at the back. And he's running a workshop this summer based on the book. So how do we know what is ours to do? One simple way that Pir Elias teaches us is in the phrase, where you are in most need, give. It's a lovely phrase. Where you notice a need coming up within you, take as a sign that this is a sign of something you need to give to others. Notice what arises in you as a need. Think what you this week have had when you thought, I have a need for food. Who do I need to give food to? I have a need for success. Who do I need to make successful? I have a need for alcohol. Who can I offer a drink to? Or the true wine of wisdom. So let's hear how Elias goes on to say that kindness is
a gesture, pure in itself, because it is not burdened with any notions of self-importance or preconceived ideas of fixing anything. It arises from your natural seamlessness with the world. Either the world far away or the world close at hand.
Kindness is a gesture. I love the notion of how do we discover those gestures that just and offer kindness and discover what's knocking on our door, asking us to respond with that natural gesture. This is natural, it's graceful, it comes naturally to us, kindness. And then finally, before the break, we are one human family. Compassion and service are not there for spiritual pride in this life, or even reward in a hoped-for next life, but they spring from knowing that we are all one human family. The writer Peter Senge said in a recent talk how human beings have spent millennia discovering how to flourish and be incredibly successful in localized niches all around the world. But now we have, for better or worse, created one integrated globalized niche. We as a species have no idea how to flourish in such a niche. We certainly have a lot we need to learn quickly. Let's listen to the United Nations Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, when he was in Tehran, the capital of Iran, on the 30th of August 2012.
At the entrance of the United Nations, there is a magnificent carpet, maybe the largest carpet the United Nations has, that adorns its wall, a gift from the people of Iran. Alongside it are the wonderful words of the great Persian poet Sadi. All human beings are members of one frame, since all at first from the same essence came. When time afflicts a limb with pain, the other limbs at rest cannot remain. If you feel not for others' misery, a human being is no name for thee.
We are all one body. If thou feel not for others' misery, a human being is no name for thee. But at the same time as Sadi was writing, in Shiraz, Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi wrote in his Mathnawi these words:
beyond our ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make sense anymore.
Perhaps I should stop at that point. But 500 years before Rumi, Rabia of Basra, when she was in the desert, wrote,
In love, nothing exists between heart and heart. Speech is born out of longing. True description from the real taste. The one who tastes knows. The one who explains lies. How can you describe the true form of something in whose presence you are blotted out? And in whose being you still exist? And who lives as a sign for your journey?
So 3 poets. We're going to end with a 4th, described as the Sheikh of Sheikhs, Ibn Arabic. And we're going to end so that we have a taste rather than lies that try to explain, to quote Rabia. We're going to end with singing it. Those of us here at the front will start, led by Camilla, and then we invite you to join in. And we'll just sing this for 3 or 4 minutes to bring the first half to a close and to allow whatever echoes you've received in your mind or your heart just to settle. As we sing the words of Ibn Arabi, take me away from myself and be my being. Take me away from myself and be my being. Then shall you see everything through my eyes. The sense that we get out of the way and let the oneness of life live through us and look out through our eyes in our particular place in the oneness of the earth. Jamila.
Take me away from myself and be my being. Take me away from myself and be my being. Then you will see everything through my eyes. Then you will see everything through my eyes. Take me away from myself and be my being. Take me away from myself and be my being. Then shall you see everything through my eyes. Then shall you see everything through my eyes. Take me away from myself and be my being. Take me away from myself and be my being. Then shall you see everything through my eyes. Then shall you see everything through my eyes. Take me away from myself and be my being. Take me away from myself and be my being. Then shall you see everything through my eyes. Then shall you see everything through my eyes.
We shall now have a 20-minute break. No, 15 minutes, I think. 15 minutes, so we'll finish by 9:30. There is tea and coffee, and I invite you also to spend time with friends, old, new, or yet undiscovered. If you want to find out more about the Sufi way, there are some leaflets about the program, there are some books at the back, and for those who are active in the Sufi way, just stand up so you can see people you can ask. Yeah. Ooh. So these are all people you can ask about what goes on and what happens, and they'll all give you different answers. So have a good break, and we'll ring a little bell at the end of the quarter of an hour. Thank you for being here. And we welcome you back in quarter of an hour with some more music and some more poetry and music together. Thank you.
I put a new disc in. We lost the last few minutes because you ran over.
Right.
But